On the Buzz Meter this Sunday, President Trump and the media escalate their warfare over who's to blame for the mailing of pipe bombs to CNN and leading Democrats, even after an unhinged suspect is arrested.
He blamed the victim tonight. For him to sit there and blame us, we're the victims here.
And only us.
Is disgusting.
They just sent a bomb to CNN, and the president doesn't say a word about that, and then tells us we are to blame.
The idea that Donald Trump is responsible for these attacks is patently absurd, any more so, by the way, than the idea that Hillary Clinton was responsible for the shooting of Steve Scalise.
We don't know who sent the packages, but I do know in my heart that President Trump bears a lot of responsibility for rhetoric that made it almost inevitable that top Democrats in the media would be targeted.
The president chose instead to blame one of the intended targets, a target that he himself views and has called publicly an enemy of the people.
We are now on day 4 of what is the media's shameful attempt to connect President Trump, Fox News, talk radio, even me, to this deplorable actions of a madman.
And that debate now extends to yesterday's slaughter at a synagogue in Pittsburgh that claimed 11 lives, with the Washington Post saying Trump is being accused of fostering the toxic environment for such political violence. Is there a journalistic reflex to blame the president? Constant coverage of the caravan as the press accuses President Trump of using the migrants as a way of stirring up his base over illegal immigration, and journalists say lying in the process.
Of course, the Democrats had nothing to do with creating a movement of people in Central America so that Donald Trump could then use that movement of people as a campaign device to lie about so that he could create more fear and loathing in his desperately fearful supporters.
It was the media and the advocacy groups who had seized on this spectacle to begin with to create an ugly political issue. And then they go, but look what Trump is doing. They're a bunch of hypocrites.
With the fact-checkers challenging the president once again, former communications chief Anthony Scaramucci says, yeah, he lies, but his supporters don't care. Is that true? The Mooch will be here. Plus, NBC has dumped Megyn Kelly from the Today Show after a fierce backlash to her comments about dressing up in blackface.
I'm Megyn Kelly, and I want to begin with 2 words. I'm sorry.
Why was that apology not enough to save her morning show job? I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. President Trump's initial response to the first wave of pipe bomb attacks against former presidents and a major news outlet was to ask both sides to tone it down.
The media also has a responsibility to set a civil tone and to stop the endless hostility and constant negative and oftentimes false attacks and stories. Have to do it.
But CNN President Jeff Zucker chastised Trump and Sarah Sanders in saying there's a total and complete lack of understanding at the White House about the seriousness of their continued attacks on the media, and that prompted the president, by the way, to ratchet up his rhetoric on Twitter. A very big part of the anger we see today in our society is caused by the purposely false and inaccurate reporting of the mainstream media that I referred to as fake news, and at his rallies as well.
We have seen an effort by the media in recent hours to use the sinister actions of one individual to score political points against me and the Republican Party.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Emily Jashinsky, culture editor at The Federalist, Sarah Fisher, media reporter for Axios, and Adrian Elrod, Democratic strategy and former Hillary Clinton campaign aide. Emily, what do you think of journalists and pundits blaming President Trump because of his rhetoric for what was an unknown perpetrator sending pipe bombs to CNN and Barack Obama and the Clintons and Joe Biden and other leading Democrats?
I think it's unfortunate, and it takes responsibility away from where it belongs with the sick and twisted individuals who are committing these heinous crimes, whether it's yesterday, whether it was earlier this week with these pipe bombs. To blame anybody but the people responsible for this, I find disgraceful and unfortunate. Of course, my prayers are with the victims of all of these crimes right now, but it was tough to watch some of the media coverage this week as well.
Adrian, and we see this on the synagogue shooting as well, which we'll talk about in moments. No matter how much people may dislike President Trump's rhetoric, fake news, enemy of the American people against the press, I've been critical of that. Is the finger pointing unfair when the suspect who was arrested Friday has a long history of crimes and terror threats that way predate Donald Trump even being in politics?
The media coverage, the media blaming is not unfair because while I'm not going to sit here and blame Donald Trump for any of this, I will say that the divisive and hateful rhetoric that he has spewed as president of the United States, he did this when he was a candidate. Frankly, it helped get him elected. He's still doing it now as president. That is a big problem here. And what he could have done this week.
It's a big problem. It's fine to say that. When you say here, are you tying that to people using bombs and rifles to try to kill other folks?
I am saying that there is a divisiveness in this country that the president of the United States has created, and he goes to his rallies. He criticizes the media. We've had media who, of course, have had to have Secret Service protection. He's not doing anything to try to bring this country together. He could have used this moment, and yes, he said a couple things earlier this week to try to, say we need to unify, we need to come together, and then he attacked CNN. Let's also not forget, Howie, that he tweeted a video last year of him in a wrestling outfit tackling a CNN reporter.
All right, let me get to Sarah. And by the way, even after the suspect was arrested, Steve Schmidt, Republican strategist, MSNBC contributor, says, well, Trump created an atmosphere where a sick person, a criminal, somebody like this terrorist would actualize Trump's clear intent. So before it was like, well, don't blame Trump because it might be a lunatic. Now it's like, yeah, it's a lunatic, but he loves Trump, so we can still blame Trump.
I think that Donald Trump's rhetoric fans the flames for an already existing problem. And so, as Adrian said, there are things that he could be doing to create more unity so that you're not having people that are acting out and blaming, pundits or targeting pundits. But Donald Trump's not doing that. He might say it's time to call for unity, but then he goes out in his rallies and he endorses people who are beating up on journalists. He still continues to attack CNN. And so I think you're in a little bit of a chicken and the egg situation. Once Donald Trump starts, then the media fights back, and it's not a very presidential thing to start.
Well, yeah, there was, by the way, some divisiveness in this country before Donald Trump was elected. Sure. Let's turn the camera around, because here you have Donald Trump saying the media should be more civil, and I'm seeing very little self-reflection on that. Isn't it true that cable news and the web reward divisive rhetoric and play up inflammatory sound bites?
This is what's been difficult for me to watch as a conservative, someone who has monitored just terrible media coverage for years, and it's part of the reason that I came to this city to do what I do, because I grew up so frustrated by this. It's a hard. I hesitate to talk about it now because obviously CNN was the victim this week. They had a device sent to their headquarters, whatever. But when you see at rallies people chanting CNN sucks, I would never do it personally. But CNN makes no effort to understand why people feel that way. They do the opposite, right? They act like they're the victims, that they've done nothing wrong to deserve this. And they have played, the chyrons that CNN ran on their lower thirds this week, some of them were ridiculous, and that's what gets people so upset. And so there's no room for violence. There's no room to be sending devices to CNN. It has to stop. I hate it, but there needs some self-reflection. I
want to get to the Chiron, so I'll come to you, Sarah. So, first of all, CNN's New York bureau was evacuated along with the rest of Time Warner Center, and the anchors had to go out on the street and report, Jim Sciutto, Poppy Harlow. So this was personal for CNN, so I understand some of the emotional reaction we are seeing. On the other hand, here's John King, CNN anchor, saying on the air that he doesn't blame President Trump for the pipe bomb attacks. And look at this on-screen headline. CNN, Trump has no plans to claim any personal responsibility for inciting serial bomber. Sarah.
This happens all the time. If you're a web producer and you're changing the headline on a web article that doesn't reflect the article, the same thing happens in TV. It doesn't make it okay.
But CNN made an editorial decision to put that on the screen.
They absolutely did make an editorial decision, but it wasn't necessarily John King's decision, and that's
No, I'm not blaming John King. I'm looking at the network.
Right. Well, the network is going, quite honestly, the network is going to blow this up, and they are going to be a little bit hyperbolic, to be completely fair, because quite frankly, they feel personally attacked, and because also they feel as though inciting that sort of really, that move is going to resonate with their audience.
Adrian, I have a presidential tweet for you on this very subject. Put it up on the screen. Funny how lowly rated CNN, and others, can criticize me at will and even blaming me for the current spate of bombs and ridiculously comparing this to September 11th and the Oklahoma City bombing. Yet when I criticize them, they go wild and scream, it's just not presidential.
Look, Again, I agree with everything that we all said here. This has been an ongoing issue with President Trump and CNN. Obviously, Jeff Zucker, the president of CNN, had every right to say what he said because CNN has taken this very personally. But Donald Trump has a big issue here. Anytime there's an article or any sort of media that he doesn't like that criticizes him, he calls it fake news, when really it's oftentimes covering things that he said, whether he was misspeaking, was not was lying about something, didn't get his facts straight, and he has really caused a lot of this since the very beginning of when he started running for president. So this is an ongoing issue. I wish that we could take this moment and use it as a reset so that the media and the president could start from ground zero.
Yeah,
and we could,
I would like to see
do a reset.
truce, but if anything, there's been an escalation. By the way, this suspect in the mail bombs spewed a lot of threats and hatred on Twitter, and Twitter did nothing. And Twitter needs to step up on this. So there was also a presidential tweet. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically he was complaining about all the coverage that the mail bomber was getting, saying this was slowing the momentum of the Republicans in the midterms, news not talking politics. The president took some heat for that.
Yeah, and I think it sort of revealed a mindset that I wish the president of the United States didn't have, that when something happens, it's not, you shouldn't automatically be jumping to the political implications of it and how it can be used politically. I didn't like that at all. I mean, this was just such a tough week. There's so many things in so many different directions that were disappointing to see, and that tweet was one of them.
And Adrian, a lot of the critiques I find of the president is of his style. So, for example, he didn't mention CNN by name in terms of, he didn't mention Barack Obama, he didn't mention the Clintons, he didn't call any of them.
Correct.
And I think there was a lot of criticism in the press that, well, these are things a traditional president would do, but as we know, Donald Trump is not a traditional president.
Correct, but still, even if he's not a traditional president, there are things that he can still and should do as president of the United States, and he should put all of his his animus aside that he has for Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and the Obamas and CNN, and get on the phone and call these people and say, let's use this as a moment to come together. And I'm sorry that you went through this. He didn't do it. Yeah. Even if he's not traditional, he still should have done that.
He could have said, look, I've been highly critical of CNN, and I stand by that criticism, but it is greatly unfortunate that these pipe bombs were sent, and, people felt threatened. I mean, you think about people losing their lives, whether it's somebody in the mailroom or one of the anchors. The New York Times had a wrap-up the other day about the conspiracy theory that went out there before the arrest, that this was some left-wing scam. These were harmless bombs sent by Democratic operatives to generate sympathy, and talking about how it spread from certain fringe conservative websites. People like Ann Coulter, the mainstream media. Lou Dobbs had a tweet that he posted and then deleted talking about fake bombs. Are some in the media too quick to give these conspiracy theories oxygen? Obviously, we know now it's not true because of the person who was arrested.
I think a lot in the media are really too quick to give some of them oxygen. And part of the problem, again, as you mentioned, is social media. You see these conspiracy theories and hashtags go viral instantly overnight. And so there's a sense of false authority, like they're getting tons of pickup, when in reality, it's just fanning the flames. It's not.
Right. So then television producers see this and say, oh, this has got 1,000 retweets or 1 million likes or whatever, and I guess it's news and we ought to at least report it. We're not endorsing it, but then you are kind of spreading it. And I think we need to be a lot more cautious about that. Let me get a break here. Ahead, Anthony Scaramucci on his former boss's continuing war in the media and vice versa. But when we come back, the horrifying shooting at a Pittsburgh synagogue. Some in the press actually trying to tie this one to the president as well. After a gunman who openly despised Jews opened fire yesterday in a Pittsburgh synagogue, killing 11 people and wounding 6 others, President Trump denounced what he called an evil act produced by the poison of hatred against the Jewish people, who, he said, have been persecuted for centuries.
This was an anti-Semitic attack at its worst. The scourge of anti-Semitism cannot be ignored, cannot be tolerated, and it cannot be allowed to continue.
And today, the Washington Post front page, above the fold headline pointing to this and other recent attacks, cites critics as saying the president and the GOP have gone beyond partisan political combat into outright demagoguery against racial minorities, foreigners, and prominent Jewish political figures. Emily, I'm not saying the press shouldn't hold the president accountable for his rhetoric, which sometimes gets hot, which sometimes is caustic, which sometimes is offensive to many people. But the critics are somebody from the SCLU and a couple of other liberals, say he's fomenting right-wing extremism like it didn't exist before.
Yeah, I mean, and that Washington Post story was very disappointing because anti-Semitism is something that festers at the fringes of both parties. It completely exists on both sides. And to say that to tie it somehow to, again, we had this conversation in the last block as though the person that's responsible for this is not responsible on their own, as though there's anybody else has any responsibility for what happened in that synagogue yesterday. It's just disappointing. It's really disappointing and wrong.
And Adrian, my heart absolutely breaks for this tight-knit Jewish community in Pittsburgh where this hateful shooting took place in a place of worship. The shooter had a history of anti-Semitic social postings, again, you know, allowed to rant and rave. But as far as President Trump, I mean, there were many mass shootings when Barack Obama was president, including the tragedy of the 9 African Americans killed in that South Carolina church. So from a press perspective, it's not like this violence began with the Trump administration.
Correct. This has been going on for a long time. Mass shootings, unfortunately, have been going on for a long time. But there is still an underlying thread to the pipe bombs, to these shootings that happened yesterday, and that is hate. And the President of the United States, regardless of political party, has the responsibility to do everything that he or she can to bring this country together. And the media is not seeing that from President Trump, even though I will give him credit for his words yesterday, which were unifying. But we need to see more of that. And I think that the press does have a point when they say if the president was doing more to unite this country, you know, we might see less of this.
Just briefly, Emily, it's not one-sided. Doesn't the press also have a responsibility to be more careful in what's reported and in inflammatory language and attacks?
I believe that's true. I will say that in this context, I don't, like, obviously both sides have responsibility, but in this context, I don't want to say that either of those things, I don't want to say the press caused it, I don't want to say the president, in either direction.
I'm talking about a mutual responsibility.
But yes,
President
absolutely.
also getting some
Absolutely.
flack for saying, well, it would be better if there was an armed guard at the synagogue. I don't know if there can be armed guards at every place of worship in America. Slate had a headline, Sarah, the president's dehumanizing language has made political violence and hate crimes like this, the synagogue shooting, more likely. Julia Yaffe, a GQ writer who lost a previous job for tweeting a so-called joke about the president and incest, posted this yesterday. A word to my fellow American Jews. This president makes this possible here where you live.
Going too far. Absolutely going too far. The president's rhetoric, again, it doesn't help, but the president's rhetoric is not what caused this particular incident.
She was talking about moving the embassy to Jerusalem, which, by the way, was the official policy of many Congresses, but just never got enacted. Yeah, so when journalists do that, it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault, and that undermines credibility. The president had nothing to do with what happened in Pittsburgh.
Going back to what Emily was saying before about CNN, I mean, the media has to understand where Trump supporters feel when it comes to the media taking one side. And it's tweets like that, by the way, which make them feel that way. I did a count earlier this year. I found that 12 journalists, 12, had lost their jobs this year due to political tweets that were taking one side or another. A lot of them had to do with, by the way, the media going overboard about their criticisms of President Trump that were unwarranted. Think about Dave Weigel and the tweets from the Washington Post about crowd sizes.
Jamel Hill of ESPN.
That's right.
Calling him a white supremacist. Yeah.
Yes, journalists have to take accountability for being fair, even in an environment where it can be difficult.
You know, there's a long history here and a blame game, depending on who the target is. So we talked about the shooting at the Republican baseball practice last year in Virginia, and Steve Scalise almost killed. And the guy there who hated Republicans, he should, so left-wing rhetoric can't be blamed for that. Some tried to do that. He liked Rachel Maddow's show. She had absolutely nothing to do with it. This guy watched Fox News, the mail bomber. It had nothing to do with it. And this goes back to, you know, Sarah Palin being blamed even recently by the New York Times for the shooting of Gabby Giffords because she put out a political map. When Timothy McVeigh blew up the Oklahoma City federal building, Bill Clinton went after Rush Limbaugh for fostering a climate of hate. This has to stop. These are not the people responsible. We should hold them accountable when they go too far in their rhetoric, including the president and others, and including the media as well. Great to see you all this Sunday. Adrian Elrod, Sarah Fisher, Emily Jashinsky. Ahead, President Trump accuses the Saudis of a terrible cover-up in the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Isn't that what the press has been saying all along? But up next, President Trump makes the Central American caravan a major midterm issue with plenty of help from the media. It's known simply as the caravan, the thousands of migrants who have made their way from Honduras to Mexico. And President Trump has turned it into a daily television story. What's driving the coverage, as Trump knew it would, is the pundits challenging his motives in making the migrants a major midterm issue.
One of the things you do see him doing is sort of ginning up the culture war, kind of ginning up this idea that there are these horrible brown people, you know, coming to America, possibly Middle Easterns, even though there's no evidence of that.
Rather than doing actual reporting and digging into this, it's easier to take up the mantra of the left. embed yourself with the migrants, actually act like you're a migrant, emotionally manipulate the audience, and then dismiss Trump as just a heartless fearmonger.
The media also turned the caravan into a debate on the president's veracity, and he gave them the ammunition.
Is there any evidence that there are terrorists as part of this caravan?
You know what you should do, John? Go into the middle of the caravan, take your cameras and search. You're going to find MS-13, you're going to find Middle Eastern, you're going to find everything.
But the White House offered zero evidence, as the president had to admit.
But they intercept. They're in the caravan. Well, they could very well be.
But there's no proof.
There's no proof of anything. There's no proof of anything. But they could very well be.
While Trump weighs an emergency plan to close the border to the migrants, that was leaked to the Washington Post and New York Times, he stoked the debate with a term that sparked anger on the left.
And I say, really, we're not supposed to use that word. You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay? I'm a nationalist.
I don't think it's a stretch for a lot of Americans out there to wonder whether or not the president is secretly considering himself a white nationalist.
Nationalist. Use that word. We're going to talk about that word tonight. It is a favorite of the alt-right and is loaded with nativist and racial undertones.
Hitler was a nationalist. Of course, so were Mahatma Gandhi and Abraham Lincoln and every other leader of every other nation state throughout history until about 20 minutes ago. But whatever.
Huge difference between nationalist and white nationalist. Now, the press was right to call Trump on his unproven charges, but wound up helping him turn the caravan into a major controversy by taking the president's bait. Ahead on MediaBuzz, why did NBC move so quickly to dump Megyn Kelly after an on-air blunder? But first, Anthony Scaramucci says Trump supporters will never abandon him, even if they think he's lying. The Mooch is here live. Some presidential confidants praise him no matter what, but our next guest has sometimes been critical, including on this program. Joining us now from Los Angeles is Anthony Scaramucci, the former White House communications director and author of the new book, Trump, the Blue-Collar President. Now, you've told me that you don't like President Trump's constant criticism of the press. You've told him as well. What do you make of liberal critics in the media, pundits, some anchors who say that Donald Trump's hot rhetoric and enemy of the American people, broadsides against the press, have helped foster a climate that helped produce the pipe bomb attacks?
Okay, well, I think that's obviously unfair. I mean, you can't link madmen or people that have mental illness and say, well, it's because of the president. So you can't hold him accountable for those people. But if you're asking me, could the president de-escalate a little bit and have his approval ratings go up and be seen a little bit differently? Howie, I absolutely believe that. I think he's got a 5 to 7 point headwind from some of the bellicosity of the rhetoric. And so he may say, well, that's what got me to the presidency. But I think now is a transcendental moment for him where he could go to another level. And there's no reason why he couldn't be in the mid-50s, given what I see going on in the economy, right, and how happy people are with, jobs, wage growth, et cetera. So, but yeah, you can't hold him accountable for those people. That's ridiculous.
Some people in the press also tying it to the horrible synagogue attack in Pittsburgh yesterday that killed 11 people. So if you think he could help himself politically by toning down the bellicosity and just, for example, he never made any public mention of the fact that CNN and Barack Obama and the Clintons and so forth were targets of these pipe bombs. Why doesn't he do that? Because he believes it helps him politically not to?
Well, no, I don't even think he's that contemplated about it. I think he's biologically designed where when people are smack talking against him, he'll smack talk back 2, 3, 4 times. And so he doesn't like the fact that he feels he's been treated unfairly. The Harvard study says 92% of the press treats him negatively. And so when they're coming at him, he'll come at them 4 or 5 times. But if he slowed it down one notch and just dialed in some level of, a smoother edge, if you will. It's not saying that he doesn't have to be adversarial, but the whole warlike thing is just hurting him. So to me, calling President Obama as an example, that sign of graciousness, that would help him with that 5 to 7% of the people that really like him, but they're a little bit concerned about the sharpness of the tone, a little bit concerned about all of the angry rhetoric.
Let me ask you about the president's veracity, a major topic in the media. Let me just briefly play a clip from MSNBC daytime news anchor Stephanie Ruhle.
Every day the President of the United States lies, and every day the media fact checks him. And if he would like that to stop, he should stop lying.
So that's the daily drumbeat. Trump lies, he exaggerates, he creates his own facts. And you've said, sure, he lies. You've told him not to lie, but that journalists and other opponents make a mistake in thinking this is the way to beat him by on this question. Explain.
Yeah, well, I mean, number one, I think it's a little bit of puffery, it's a little bit of that exaggeration. It's a lot like what my grandfather would say, why let the truth get in the way of a very good story? The president has an entertainment streak to his personality, particularly at these rallies, and so he does play to the crowd. And I think that these hall monitors in the media that are, quote unquote, fact checking him and have all of this anger are making a very big mistake. It's okay to say, okay, he said this, but here's the facts. But to get all upset like that, I think it's not helping them.
Right.
If anything, it's galvanized the president's base. So
well,
they don't like when I say that. They cut me off. So
I'm not going to cut you off. I'll give you a chance to answer. Sometimes I think he just gets things wrong. Other times, perhaps he doesn't bother or doesn't want to know what the reality is. But think about what you're saying. You're his friend, his former aide. You wrote a book praising him as the blue-collar president, so you're clearly rooting for him. And you're acknowledging a pretty steady stream of lies by the President of the United States. You've said he can lie, he can tell 10,000 lies as far as you're concerned, and yet you're saying it doesn't matter. So aren't you giving him a giant pass?
No, I don't think so. I didn't say it didn't matter. I think it's fine for the media to hold him accountable. I'm saying something differently. I'm saying
you're saying his supporters don't care. You're saying his supporters do not care.
I'm saying that his supporters have felt a vacuum. I write in my book, Howie, that the middle class and lower middle class, for whatever reason, have never felt an advocate in the Oval Office, at least for 30 or 40 years. Now, some of my Democratic friends will be mad at me for saying that, but just think about what happened. He hijacked the base of the Democratic Party and moved it over to the ledger of the Republicans. And so how did he do that? He did that because these people want jobs, they want higher wages, and they want better things for their children. And so the Democrats focused on a lot of the social issues and the appropriateness of being politically correct and some of the environmental issues. And I'm not even taking issue with any of that, but I'm just explaining that you left a wide open berth for somebody like President Trump to step in there. So he may say some mistruths. He may say things that you don't like. But guess what? Those people are galvanized around him. They like him, and he's going to win re-election. So you'd be so much better off as a Democrat if you said, wow, you know, he did steal our people. Let's change our product line and speak to those people about policies that can work for them, rather than fact-checking the President of the United States.
Now, Mooch, you told CNN that Trump is not a nationalist, but that he says he is. That created some controversy because he wants you, the network, the media, to be upset about it. So is some of what he does in this realm simply aimed at sticking it to the press or generating a big press reaction, which then amplifies his message?
Okay, so the fact that people don't understand what you just said is absolute fact. I find it ironic. It's almost like laughable. Okay, so, you know, he's clearly not a nationalist. Okay, he can go out tomorrow night and speak somewhere, you know, pick the location on the campaign trail, call himself a nationalist. But the Orwellian definition, the Barbara Tuchman definition, the 200 years of understanding the specter and the rise of nationalism, he's a peacekeeper. He's not a nationalist. And so he can keep saying it if he wants. It'll rile up the media. The media will focus on that. And again, they're missing the point on the deliverables to blue-collar people, blue-collar families, and the middle class.
Last question, because I've got half a minute left. In your book on your...
It's a sleight of hand, Howie.
Sorry to break in. In your book on your 11 days as communications director, you now say, you told Meet the Press that John Kelly, the chief of staff, has hissy fits and he's hurting the president. Given that Kelly was a guy who kind of helped usher you out of the White House, is this a little personal on your part?
Yeah, so, I mean, listen, if you want to think it's personal, that's fine. I've been fired before. John wasn't the first person to fire me. I've also had to fire people, so it's not personal. I'm just being observational of what I see going on. And if you think I'm the only person that is a current or former White House staff member that thinks that way, that's fine, too. But I know that's not the case. But that's another reason why I couldn't really survive in Washington, because, you know, I like speaking very plainly and telling people the truth. So if you think it's personal, I'll let people that are viewing your show evaluate that. But for me, it really wasn't personal. I don't like the way I was fired. I think it's ridiculous to fire a guy like me like that. given the amount of money I raised, the media advocacy, and my support of the president, you didn't have to do it that way. I think it's ridiculous, and it's a poor reflection on him.
All right, well, I like people who speak plainly. That's why I like having you on. Good luck with the book. Anthony Scaramucci, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Hal.
After the break, the Saudis changed their story on the Khashoggi murder again. Guess what? It was premeditated. How do you cover such mendacious lies? And later, why Megyn Kelly's apology for her blackface comments isn't enough for NBC. This week's pipe bomb attacks follow a media uproar over the gruesome murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And after weeks of shifting cover stories, Saudi Arabia's public prosecutor now says, yes, evidence suggests that the killing of the Washington Post contributor was premeditated. And President Trump's stance has evolved as well.
It was carried out poorly, and the cover-up was one of the worst in the history of cover-ups. It's very simple. Bad deal, should have never been thought of. Somebody really messed up, and they had the worst cover-up ever.
Joining us now is Fox News correspondent Jillian Turner. And Jillian, when the coverage of the Khashoggi murder was at its peak, some people, especially on the right, said the media were way overplaying this because it was a columnist, one of our own, maybe as a way to criticize the president. Now that CNN is a pipe bomb target, you're not hearing that as much, perhaps because the targets also included Obama, the Clintons, Biden, Eric Holder, and so forth.
Well, I think that what the media was reacting to was the fact that the president did not come straight out and condemn the Saudis, the royal family. The media is very prickly about this. And it's not just when it comes to Saudi Arabia. It's not just when it comes to President Trump. When they feel he's hedging and he's not forceful enough in condemning America's enemies, they get mad. And that's, we saw that with Kim Jong-un, with Vladimir Putin, now with the Crown Prince.
Well, weren't the media entitled to be prickly because the Saudis were telling a ludicrous story? I mean, last week on this program, we had Brett Baerzin, the Saudi foreign minister, who was still peddling the fistfight story. It was just a fistfight that erupted inside the consulate in Turkey. And now we have the president coming around. Initially, he seemed inclined to sort of defer to the Saudi explanations. And now he says, worst cover-up ever. So were the media right to keep pushing on this?
I think so, because, the president came out on the right side eventually, once I guess he was waiting for whatever his own reasons were. It was very well said. It was the worst cover-up job in the history of maybe all time. It was obvious to everybody what happened.
I mean, initially they said he walked out alive.
Right.
Then it was a fistfight, and then finally now premeditated, which was obvious all along.
And it was, as a member of the media, as a member of the American public, what the Saudis were peddling here was offensive for the first 2 weeks.
Right. Now the Crown Prince says, oh, this was a heinous crime and so forth. How do reporters cover a regime that, in this case at least, blatantly lied again and again? It is now evident. This is not an opinion. It's fact.
It is fact. I will say, though, that it's also something that foreign governments do. They lie to the United States. It's not something new.
What distinguished it maybe that this was such a high-profile case, or that the media made it such a high-profile case with Khashoggi?
And the media doesn't have to make the same considerations that the government does, right? I mean, they have a different role. They don't necessarily have to worry about American national security interests the way that President Trump does.
Or balancing act with trade and military sales with the Saudis.
Exactly.
Right. They can just sort of be morally outraged, especially if a journalist happens to be involved. Now, we're seeing some of the same finger-pointing going on with yesterday's mass shooting at the synagogue in Pittsburgh. I mentioned earlier some headlines suggesting President Trump, with his tone, is perhaps to blame. And it brings this up, which is, what's your reaction as a reporter when people said, nobody cared about this Khashoggi killing except for journalists? And how come you journalists didn't care about the deaths in Benghazi, which I take exception to?
I do, too. I got a lot of comments when I was reporting on the Khashoggi murder from folks on social media saying exactly that, saying, how can you care about one person from Saudi Arabia when we have a caravan careening towards the U.S. border, when we have people, Americans murdered in Benghazi? It's a spurious line of reasoning to me.
I mean, everybody cared about the fact that 4 American lives were lost at Benghazi. It then became a 2-year investigation with a lot of political overtones, and that's where opinions diverged. So
that was part of the, I don't know where that line of thinking originated. I don't know if it was a government sort of line that was being pushed, or whether people came up with that on their own. That this is just one person. They're not an American.
He was a bad guy anyway.
Well, he was a bad guy. Ties to Hezbollah. All of that. I don't know where that came from, but it was completely ineffective.
I think the one thing we can conclude is that in the current climate, even murder, even violence can and is being politicized, and that's sad to me, at least. Jillian Turner, great to see you. I know you got a busy day today. Still to come, NBC spent $69 million to lure Megyn Kelly from Fox. Why is the brass now so quick to dump her? Megyn Kelly was talking about Halloween, of all things, on her NBC morning show when she made a big blunder.
What is racist? Because truly, you do get in trouble if you are a white person who puts on blackface for Halloween, or a black person who puts on whiteface for Halloween. Like, back when I was a kid, that was okay as long as you were dressing up as like a character.
The former Fox News host apologized to her colleagues in a letter, but that didn't stop the criticism within NBC or the coverage on the network.
The fact is, while she apologized to the staff, she owes a bigger apology to folks of color around the country, because this is a history going back to the 1830s.
Her comments came during a panel discussion on her program this morning, quickly sparking a backlash over remarks many viewed as racially tone-deaf.
I'm Megyn Kelly, and I want to begin with 2 words. I'm sorry. I learned that given the history of blackface being used in awful ways by racists in this country, it is not okay for that to be part of any costume, Halloween or otherwise.
NBC has now confirmed reports by me and other journalists that it's ending her role anchoring the 3rd hour of the Today Show. Joining me now from New York, Marisa Guthrie, television editor for The Hollywood Reporter. So how big a mistake were these blackface comments, considering that Megyn Kelly made a full apology on the air?
Well, they were the last nail in the coffin. She had been talking to Andy Lack, NBC News chairman, before she made the comments about winding down her 9 a.m. show. It wasn't necessarily working. She had lost nearly 500,000 viewers compared to the show she replaced, which was a lot cheaper to put on. So, and she had angered NBC News management by aggressively reporting on Matt Lauer, by reporting on the accusations against Tom Brokaw, and then by suggesting that NBC should hire an outside investigator for the Ronan Farrow, Harvey Weinstein reporting. All of these things that made NBC News management very angry. So the blackface
Well, hold on
comments,
now. So yeah, so she was. She made them angry by being aggressive in reporting when it came to NBC people. Look, there was a lot of resentment against Megyn at NBC. She also felt that she wasn't being supported. There were a lot of leaks that seemed to come from NBC against her, places like New York Post. So when you say final nail in the coffin, it almost sounds like NBC seized upon this admitted mistake as a way to orchestrate her rapid exit.
Look, I think that if she had not done all of those other preceding things, and her ratings were great, and management liked her, they would have supported her. But they signaled pretty right away with that report on NBC Nightly News, the day that she made the comments, that was nearly 5 minutes, the report, which is an eternity for a 22-minute broadcast. And so they signaled right away that the gloves were off, that they were not supporting her, that she had no support internally.
Right. Long report. I mean, I give NBC credit for covering it, but the way in which it was covered suggested that there was maybe a bit of a grudge. And then there were these leaked reports that Andy Lack, as you say, the NBC News chairman, had privately condemned the remarks to other staff members. So it seemed like, this all happened so quickly that Megyn Kelly had almost no chance to fight back. And, I also give her credit for the apology. I mean, it wasn't like she went out and said everybody should go in blackface. She just put it in artfully. It was a serious mistake, but as you say, was the resentment also tied to the fact that she was making so much money, the $69 million contract, and that she had come from Fox?
Well, I think that her persona and her on-air style, a prosecutorial interviewer, somebody who challenged orthodoxies, like she brought that to NBC. That's who she was when they hired her.
Right. What did NBC think it was getting?
Exactly. And this has been a narrative in all of this coverage that, she may have convinced herself that she could do this morning thing. She may have convinced NBC executives, but they should have used a little more introspective and knew what they were getting. And so you put her in that, and the demographics of morning TV and daytime TV have changed. So her style worked very well at Fox News. She was a tough interviewer. She was, really a strong interviewer. And so that didn't fit with daytime TV. She was bringing all of that to the 9 a.m. hour of today.
Right.
And it was causing all sorts of problems.
Well, I understand the debate. Maybe it wasn't a great fit and all that, but at the same time, it seems the way in which she was pushed out over this in a way that made her seem guilty despite the apology was just brutal. Was just brutal, but television,
it was
as
brutal,
we know,
and she went but they let her go on and apologize.
Right.
So
and then that was her last day, and then she had to,
Yes.
and then suddenly she's gone. All right, we got to go. Marisa Guthrie, thanks very much for sharing your insights.
No problem.
And that's it for this edition of Media Buzz. I'm Howard Kurtz. Hey, check out my new podcast, Media Buzz Meter. We kick around the day's 5 most important or interesting stories. You can subscribe, Apple, iTunes, Google Play, FoxNewsPodcast.com. Let's continue the conversation on Twitter at Howard Kurtz. Look at our Facebook page. I write columns there every day. We post a lot of original content. We like to have a dialogue going, especially in a week like this, when there's been so much tragedy and so much criticism of the media's behavior. Back here next Sunday, you know the time, 11 Eastern. See you then with the latest buzz.